Welcome to Decode Your Burnout, the podcast where we crack the code on burnout based on three primary factors: your programming, environment, and personality. We also feature experts who debunk the myths about what it takes to be successful in their industry and spin those tips to fit the workplace so you can optimize the way you work. I'm your host, Dr. Sharon Grossman, a psychologist turned coach, author, and burnout expert. If you're burned out and want to go from exhausted to extraordinary, book a free breakthrough session with me by going to bookachatwithsharon.com. And if you want to see how you're doing and what to focus on next, download the Burnout Checklist. You'll find the link in the show notes or go to bit.ly/checkyourburnout. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome back to Decode Your Burnout with me, Dr. Sharon Grossman. I am excited to be back, and today I have joining me somebody by the name of Michelle Quirk. Now, if you are not familiar with Michelle, she is a board-certified pediatrician and a certified run coach with the Road Runners Club of America. She founded Mindful Marathon to help make running easy and fun for busy professionals. Using an informed, enjoyable, and effective approach, she coaches her athletes to live long and love the love of running. I think I said that wrong. to a lifelong love of running is more like it. So Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, we talk a lot about physician burnout in general. In the news, we hear about it all the time. And being a pediatrician, I have to imagine that you've had either your share of burnout or you've seen other people around you burn out. So why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about your burnout story, and then we'll take it from there. And as you do so, I'm going to be listening for our three contributing factors: programming, environmental stressors, and personality contributions. So you have the floor.
Yeah, I think there are multiple stories along the way in terms of my own experience with burnout. But I think really the first time that I recognized that something was wrong was right after I completed my residency. So about 10 years ago, 2012. Mm-hmm. I don't think I had the word burnout at that time, but that is what I experienced. So I had, in this case, I think multiple stressors. So I had just finished my residency, moved to a new place, started my first attending job, as a pediatrician in the hospital in the emergency department, newly married, studying for board exams. And if that was not enough, during that time, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer.
Oh my goodness.
And so I was trying to juggle all of these things. And really, I describe it as I just didn't really know which way was up. Like, I was functioning, I was going to work, I was coming home, but I was tired all the time. I just felt like no matter how much I was sleeping, I couldn't get enough rest. And that was really when I picked up running. Like, I was never a runner before that. And as a kid, I wasn't much of an athlete. I really struggled to run. And at this time, I thought, here I am, preaching to my patients and families to take care of themselves and eat nutritious foods and exercise and manage their stress. And here I was not taking my own advice. And so there was a shift there that I realized. I may not have realized exactly what was going on in terms of burnout, but I knew that something needed to change and I couldn't really stay on this treadmill, if you will. And so I picked up running at that time and just started very slow, 5-10 minutes around the block. And running is what helped me kind of move past that.
First of all, I love that little analogy of the treadmill. That's so perfect. So, wow. I mean, as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, a lot of times when people come on the show or I hear about their burnout story, it's because they're pushing themselves so hard. They're taking so much on. And what's so unique about your story is it wasn't necessarily that you were taking so much on, but it was just all of life circumstances kind of coming together at the same time. And I think this is a really great reminder for people that when we have all of these kinds of things come crashing down all at the same time. And some of them are really good things, right? I mean, certainly it was stressful to get the cancer diagnosis and, maybe like having a good, your first job may have been a little stressful, but also exciting. I got to imagine.
Yeah.
But being newly married is exciting. Studying for the boards might be, it's kind of like a mixed bag, isn't it? So some of it's exciting, some of it's kind of stressful, but it's just that it's happening all at once.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I got to imagine having gone through that experience that you have some takeaways in terms of what would you do different, or what would you tell one of your patients now if they were telling you how stressed out they were because they've got all this stuff going on, all these balls in the air? What would you say now?
Yeah, I think, this lends itself well to my first tip, which is creating space for yourself. And at that time, I did it, but I didn't know that's what I was doing intentionally. I wasn't doing it intentionally. I was creating those 5-10 minutes to run around my block. And I found that while I was out there, my head was pretty clear. I didn't think about much. I was just really in touch with nature and how I was feeling. And I think that's what helped me to continue to lace up my sneakers and keep going. And so I think being intentional about creating some space wherever you can. And, it may seem like, well, what's 5 or 10 minutes going to do? But that's what really set the habit. I was consistent with it. And 10 minutes grew into 15, 20, 30 more times a week. And, eventually I ran that first 5K. Eventually I ran a half marathon, but I started small. So you may think creating space, I don't have time to create space, but even 5 or 10 minutes a day is helpful. And you don't have to run, by the way. That was what it was for me, but maybe 5 or 10 minutes to meditate or just be alone with yourself, to be alone with your thoughts and kind of work through. I think that would be my first tip.
I think that is actually such a great message. I love how you're weaving all these things together. So first, we're talking about when you've got so much going on, you're probably in overwhelm. And what we need most when we're in overwhelm is to slow everything down. And your tip for that is create some space. Now, for each person, that's going to look completely different. Right? For you, it was going around the block initially, and that's great. So there's that. But I also think the other piece of it that you're saying is that even when you are feeling so overwhelmed that you say to yourself, I don't have time to make space, that you can start really small, but as long as you're consistent, that will you'll start to reap the benefits of it. And then that will grow as you start to see more value in it, right? And I think that's such an important thing to think about, is how when we're in the midst of chaos, it feels like we don't have time for the things that feel good, which makes no sense, right? Like, it makes absolutely no sense. But we don't do that right when we need it the most. And when we start to carve out a little bit of space for ourselves and we're like, oh my God, this feels amazing. Then all of a sudden you're like, I could probably find another 5 minutes and grow that 5-minute break into a 10-minute break. And isn't that amazing how as soon as we start to have that experience where this is valuable, I'm actually feeling better as a result of it, that we make the time that we didn't really have. Right. So I find all of that so fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, if you had told me when I started running that eventually I would run a half marathon or a marathon or whatever, I would have just said you were crazy. And like, I didn't see myself doing those things. And I would have for sure said, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to do all of that training. But it's amazing along the way how, yeah, as I was consistent with it and I felt better, and then started, kind of reaching some goals that I never thought were possible for myself. I kept working at it, and yeah, I just worked up to it very slowly. It took years, but yeah, I've stuck with it ever since.
Which is amazing. Now, it brings me back to, I was teaching a course on habit creation last year for my priming lab members. And what we were talking about is how identity is a big piece of these kinds of shifts. And so when you talk about how initially you would have said, oh, you're crazy that I'm going to do this, it's because it wasn't who you were at the time. So I think it's important, even if you don't want to run a marathon, and if we're going to use the running example, that you just maybe go for a 5-minute run. And then over time, you'll see how you feel. And what ends up happening is that we evolve as human beings. So the things that are really meaningful to us, we start to gravitate more towards. So if you're taking that 5-minute run and you're like, oh my God, actually, I could do more. Like I put on all this gear and my shoes and did all that for 5 minutes. Like I might as well go for at least 10 minutes. And then it just starts to grow from there. And I think that's true, whether it's running, whether it's meditation, any of these self-care habits, whatever works for you. And that's what I love, that even in your tip of create space, you're leaving space for us to decide how to fill in the blank.
Yeah, exactly. It's very individual and personalized to you and your life and your circumstances.
Amazing.
And I think in the same way that that I didn't see myself as a runner or a marathoner, I also never would have seen myself as a run coach either. So that came later, but you talk about the identity shift, and that I mean that really comes up for me, because when I first started running, I never would have thought I would be coaching others to do it.